on then. Okay. Right. So Ian Holland's a senior advisor at the United Nations. While the United Nations has lasted 3 times longer than its predecessor, the League of Nations, its existing structure for facilitating deliberations among the nations, as well as its systems for conflict resolution, are pushed at present beyond its capacity for effectiveness. These established systems are in need of radical transformation in order to achieve a higher level of social and political unity. So here to tell us how his experiences of working for and with the United Nations tie in with the Baha'i vision for a deepening of global cooperation, which sets out a set of principles and common values, a global civic ethic, if you like, that includes how we can all live within environmentally sustainable limits. We have Mr. Ian Holland. Thank you, Ian. Over to you.
Well, that's very kind, Malcolm. Thank you for introducing me, and thank you to all of the friends and colleagues here in this interfaith, celebrating this Interfaith Week. And I thought it was a very beautiful and unifying video that you showed beforehand, which speaks a little bit to some of the themes that I wanted to speak about this evening, touching on the framework as you've outlined there of the United Nations, and in particular the Sustainable Development Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. So with your permission, if I'm allowed to share my screen here, I think I'd like to—
You should be able to, Ian.
Yeah, just to talk through a few of those. It takes a moment just between now and the first slide usually, but let's see. Here we go. Just bear with me. I don't know if you can still hear me. Eventually we'll get a slide up. There's always a few momentary sort of transitional seconds there. So a couple of a very short presentation here. A few key themes I want to talk about, resting or anchoring into the United Nations system, as you've said there. First of all, to look at this concept of sustainability and the particular risk posed to the planet presently, the evolution of what I'm calling a collective consciousness with regard to being more aware as a global community of the challenges affecting us universally and the stages of global development that we're going through. And then what have we learned so far on this relatively brief journey of global sustainable development? I want to talk about the power of implementation. And since we're amongst friends here of a faith community or faiths community, look at perhaps one or two of the spiritual principles that we rub up against. But first of all, where have we come from? How do we find ourselves in this predicament of having a bit of an environmental or climate crisis? Well, might be interested to see this first slide if you can see it. This is the—
Well, I was going to say, Ian, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I really apologise, but is there any way you can enlarge it?
This I'm not sure that I can here, you know. Does that work? Is that slightly more—
I think that's a bit better. Yeah.
So what I'm doing here—
unfortunately, that pushes it to the side. So if you've got a bottom taskbar that you can slide it to, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But never mind all the detail. But this is the this, just to let you know, this is the 2014 risk map, the global risk map of the World Economic Forum, and just highlighting here that climate change features in the consideration, but it's not the main consideration. Okay, and quite interesting here, although it may not appear because it's quite small at the very bottom, is the issue of pandemic. We won't dwell on that right now because we're— and then in 2020, we fast forward 5 years, and actually for the first time in the World Economic Forum's history, climate change is the largest and the greatest challenge to humanity. So we're dealing with a moving feast here with all sorts of implications relating to food crisis, water crisis, and population movements. And this final graph shows that in terms of likelihood and impact, climate failure, if you like, or climate action failure, and all of the associated natural disasters and man-made environmental challenges that come with that are at the top right-hand corner in terms of likelihood and impact. So yes, we need to be really troubled by some of this. But just stepping back for a minute, moving back through sort of the last 50 years, we've reached some really important milestones, I would say. So one of these was that in the middle of the last century, we actually saw our planet from space from the first time. And many philosophers and commentators suggest that the impact of that image of our beautiful, precious world spinning through space like that, one complete ecosystem with the inhabitants of planet Earth representing one, if you like, one species, this image would have more far-reaching implications and impact than the Copernican revolution that realized that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. And we're all aware of the impact of that. So quite an important image that really affects the way that we begin to see the world, the environment, and the people on it. And a number of the Baha'is here will know that Baha'u'llah made a very interesting commentary on this in or around the 1860s or 70s when he said, "The earth is but one country and mankind its citizens." And this gives us a sense of the direction of traffic, if you like, the direction that we are going in, seeking to cooperate and regard this one planetary home as our only home and the means through which we have to cooperate in order to manage the resources of the planet in the best interest of all humanity. So we arrive then, I didn't make mention of this first report actually, this one common, our common future report, which was really the bedrock report that set the world on this flight path, being more concerned about the nature of environment and the relationship to development. Now, in the year 2000, a landmark occasion, we had the Millennium Conference that took place and the Millennium Declaration. And a number of you may know that from that conference, of all the world's leaders, 8 goals were established over a 15-year time horizon, of which environmental sustainability was one of them. And so what have we learned from the period 2000 to 2015 in pursuit of the first ever global development plan? And the challenges, if you cast your mind back to the year 2000, were quite significant. And so at the speed of light, I'm going to go through these 8 Millennium Development Goals because they give us some solace that whatever goals succeed them are capable also of being implemented when we really put our minds to it as a global, under the organization, if you like, of the United Nations, with many countries seeking to deliver goals that they're responsible for. So very quickly, in that period, extreme poverty was cut in half over a 15-year period. We'd never seen development on such an accelerated scale. We managed to get more children into school than ever before. In fact, 90% of all children were put into education at the primary level. Equality between boys and girls at school in primary education had been achieved. And amazingly, as a result of health services and breakthrough in medicines, and given a comparison with the pandemic that we're currently facing, 14,000 fewer children died each day in 2015 than in 1990. The number is incredible. It's staggering as a result of advances in health services that reach out and vaccinate children. It's a remarkable number. Maternal mortality globally fell by nearly 50% over a 15-year time horizon. And many, many millions of deaths were prevented again through interventions in healthcare. And in the environmental sector, nearly a third of the population gained access to clean drinking water. And so why do I say those things? Because that was the 15 years that took us from 2000 to 2015. And we're currently embarked on a second global development plan. And if we are able to marshal the resources and all of the means of implementation, we can also begin to tackle some of the climate change issues that we outlined at the beginning, which represent a serious challenge to us. But what did we learn in that 15-year period? The United Nations undertook an evaluation of those Millennium Development Goals. And this is one of the key findings, that global development agendas are likely to succeed where they're underpinned by the credible means of implementation. That means financial and non-financial. So a key finding here was that it's not just about governments, important that they are. It's not just about money, important that is. But the key thing here is about communities and citizens taking action at the neighborhood and household level. This empowers all of us to be able to be aware of the challenges that confront us environmentally and socially, and to be able to take action. I think we've also seen mirrors of that during the pandemic. So moving into this, the 15-year period that we're currently within, the Sustainable Development Goals were launched, the Sustainable Development Agenda, based on global leaders coming together in 2015 and agreeing on 17 new goals, covering peace, poverty, people, planet, and partnerships, covering the whole world, not just the developing world, which is what the Millennium Development Goals covered, and seeking to leave no one behind and reach farthest behind populations first. So the theme of tonight's discussion is really on environment and nature. These are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We won't go into them in any great detail. Many of you will be well aware of them, but 6 or 7 of them report to environmental considerations. And I want to draw attention to a few of those. So whereas along the bottom of this slide, you see that there were 7 or 8 Millennium Development Goals, there are 16 or 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and many more are focused on the planet, which is important for our considerations. They're all interlinked. And so if you take action on the environment, which is the one we've circled in the middle there, there's some sort of implication for all of them. And so when you do something useful for the environment, it often means that you're doing something more beneficial for example, food systems or health or responsible consumption. We'll come back to responsible consumption in a minute. But what are the spiritual principles involved? This is a really interesting one when we look at this from a faith perspective, when we come to look at the environment and the impact that we're having on Mother Earth. The international body governing the Baha'i international community is called the Universal House of Justice. It produced in commemoration, I think, of the World Decade for World Peace in the 1980s, a document called the Promise of World Peace. And in it, it said that there were spiritual principles that can be found, or spiritual solutions too, that could be found at the heart of every problem. So if we're seeking to identify problems and solutions, we're encouraged to try to identify first the spiritual principles involved, and then be guided by them in trying to marshal our pursuit. So what are the definitions of sustainable development? We've had a definition that's been around since the Rio conference, which many of you know or know that this was called the Earth Summit back in 1992, which defines sustainable development, which meets the needs of the present without compromising the future ability or the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That's been a definition that stood the test of time. But one from a spiritual perspective, which sheds further insight from at least two dimensions on this, is a Baha'i view, which says that development is an organic process in which the spiritual is expressed in the material. And this is a statement which has been around for over 100 years. And if we look at the world around us, we see good things and perhaps not so good things. The good things, we can see the reflection, if you like, of God or our creator in everything. The beauty in nature that we see reflected back to us. And we also see that the world is a challenging environment to live in presently, as you've outlined at the beginning there, Malcolm, because there are many things that are going on in society that we can claim are really suffering from a lack of ethical or moral substance in society, and a gross material pursuit of development, which has resulted in some of the catastrophic damage on the planet that we've seen. So at the recent, not quite so recent, COP22 conference in Paris in 2015, 5 years ago, when the world came together to consider our global future and the planetary challenges that we faced, the Baha'i International Community produced a document in which it said, again, trying to address these spiritual principles, that we need to not just examine our relationship between ourselves and the planet, but also the relationship between the peoples of the world and the planet. These things are inextricably linked, because at present our structures globally are often set upon nations competing with each other and using up the world's economic and environmental resources and depleting them in the process. And the United Nations is seeking to try to resolve that potential conflict and those competitions within and among nations by trying to arrive at ways in which we can better manage our global natural assets. But we've also got a responsibility and opportunity to do that at the local level. And just in terms of sort of wrapping up this brief presentation, when we talk about the oneness of humanity, it also there's a strong resonance there with how we should treat nature and biodiversity. And this, I think, is a really compelling statement. It says, regard humanity as a single individual and one's own self as a member of that form, and know of a certainty that if pain or injury afflicts any member of that body, it must inevitably result in suffering for all of the rest. And the same is true if we're damaging the planet, whether it's ecosystems or biodiversity, it inevitably results in suffering for us in some shape or form, even though we may not be aware of it at the time. So we're all encouraged practically, as Baha'u'llah said, the founder of the Baha'i faith, to be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age in which we live, and to center our deliberations on the exigencies and requirements. And we're also encouraged, we're reminded that we have a responsibility, all of us, all people, Baha'u'llah said, have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. So at the global level, that's what we're, and the United Nations is seeking to do, trying to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization, trying to encourage nation states to cooperate, trying, as we've said there, within the sustainable development agenda, to try to make sure that no peoples are left behind. And reflecting back on the 15 years between the year 2000 and 2015, if we all shoulder that responsibility, then we are able to achieve amazing change in a short period of time. And just in the, I don't know whether you can see it, but in the bottom left-hand box there, just as a reminder to all of us in terms of this individual responsibility, Sustainable Development Goal in 12 encourages responsible consumption. And here's something that we can all become directly involved in. We can think more consciously, more reflectively of when we are shopping, the food we buy, the clothes we buy, recycling measures, how we get around in terms of transport, what energy providers we use, even any investments that we make, if we have any, you know, are they ethical? And I think in this age, you know, we're much more aware than we've ever been before, and the world is in a challenging place, but being empowered, I think, as individuals and at the local level, we have more influence than we probably are aware of, and we're empowered to be able to make decisions that affect this worldwide agenda. So those are the thoughts I want to leave you with tonight. I think that they're thoughts of hope, both at the level of households and communities, but also at the global level. Despite the very real challenges that we face, nation states are seeking to deliver these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and they are proud of their reporting that they conduct on an annual basis at what we call the High Level Political Forum. And as you know, the UK is hosting the next COP discussions, the community of the parties to the Convention on Climate Change next year. So you'll see more attention paid to this agenda. But with that, Malcolm and dear friends, I'll leave it at that and look forward to any discussion and indeed the next presentation, which I think Les is going to make.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's good you said about hope there, because environmentalism is often associated with a very negative attitude of doom and gloom. But I think you've shown us a very practical vision for the future there. If we go back to Martin Luther King, he said, "I have a dream, not I have a nightmare." And so a positive approach is certainly very good. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our next guest speaker. That's Les Gornall. Dr. Gornall's first became known to me from when he was in Preston. That's many decades ago. Our friend Les has since moved across the water to Ireland, and he's tried to live his life by the Baha'i ideal: man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself deeply affected by it. So Les is here to explain just how man is organic with the world. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you now, Les. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Malcolm. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, very good. Okay. The 1992, well, first of all, Ian, thank you so much for taking us on that wonderful journey of the UN goals. The 15-year achievements are utterly astonishing, actually. We might talk about that some more later on. I'm going to put a slightly different view on sustainability. It's only subtle, but in 1992, we didn't really know how much damage we had done to the environment. And in 2020, we certainly understand that we've created an enormous amount of damage to our fragile little planet. And therefore, I would define sustainability today as living in a manner that leaves your children and grandchildren more opportunities and a richer, more diverse natural environment than the one you inherited. Slightly different, because I think we have to start serious repair. And this is what I'm trying to do, and we're caring for the planet in practice. I've just clicked on some, there we go. And to reiterate what Malcolm said, we cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us and say that once one of these is reformed, everything else will be improved. Man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is in itself also deeply affected by it. The one acts upon the other, and every abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual interactions. And I have to say, I find myself looking at areas of the earth which have been destroyed, or the Great Barrier Reef, which is now 50% destroyed, and so forth. And my heart is moved by that. But if I do nothing, it will get worse. So the way out of this, this circle, is actually free will and making a decision to change the way we live for the positive, in a positive sense. We can plant a tree, look at the tree, see it is good, and that encourages us to plant more. But the natural world is in constant change, irrespective of man. Here's William Turner's Chichester Canals, just a little way from Preston, in 1815. And you can see that the sunset is spectacular, but the clouds have this gray quality. This was a spectacular sky caused by the Tambora volcano eruption, which reflected sunlight back into space and caused the 1816 global winter famine and starvation. There were no horses left in Germany. They were either eaten or they died of starvation for the Pony Express mail service. And their annual temperature in Germany fell by 2 degrees. If anyone thinks that 2 degrees is not a lot, it's the difference between plants surviving in their own particular environmental niche or not surviving. It could be 2 degrees hotter or 2 degrees colder. This is a very big number. What we did in response was to invent the bicycle. Here you see, this is a postman in Germany on this equivalent, mechanical equivalent of a horse, a reaction to a problem caused by the environment. By 1844, we had started to use coal in a big way. And with the advent of fossil fuels came poverty relief, slowly at first. But as Ian so carefully pointed out, the number of people in absolute poverty in 1820 was 92 to 96%. And this is the number of people who've come out of poverty, out of extreme poverty. And this is the big slope from 2000 to 2015. Dramatic considering the starting point and the end point, but these people are still in absolute poverty. Now, the biggest relief of poverty that started with coal came with oil use. Essentially, machines took on the work of slaves. But the cost of that was the exhaust of carbon into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And here are the CO2 emissions per year in billions of tons. And you can see we're over 35 billion tons of carbon at the moment. It's not going down. We're still rising, maybe a smidging of a tailing off, but this is a bad line. And the atmospheric accumulation of carbon dioxide in parts per million has gone from little less than 280 parts per million to around 420 parts per million now. This leads to a simple and perhaps mistaken issue. Does the consumption of carbon relate to poverty in the future? In other words, can we decouple the two concepts of prosperity and global warming? In practical terms, if you make less CO2, will that make you poorer? And this was the question that I tried to answer quite a few years ago. Way back in 1987, the Baha'i community started to look at its resources. And so the answer is no, you don't need to become poor to reduce your carbon dioxide output. You can be warm and comfortable and produce no carbon dioxide, zero. The Baha'i community in Northern Ireland has been exploring this theme now for 34 years. We talked about willow biomass, making methane out of broiler manure, water power, in fact, all forms of renewable energy. And while our discussions weren't entirely concerned with just energy, here, you may not be able to read this, it says on the 29th of October at 8 p.m, the speaker will be Miss Joanne McKenna from the All Children Together organization, talking about integrated education, educating Muslims, educating Christians, Hindus in the one classroom with a common curriculum that recognized diversity in the population and enabled the children to work successfully through the rest of their lives in all parts of the planet. The number of people who came to this meeting, can anybody guess? 0. There was nobody came to this meeting. There were lots, and 120 people came to the energy ones. Nobody wanted at this time to talk about educating children together. There were lots of these. We worked really hard on everything from growing your own herbal medicine, fishing and sustainable fish stocks in Loch Ness. You are what you eat, and willow biomass came up really quite often because we live in a boggy place that grows willows really well. And this gentleman, Malcolm Dawson, was the world expert, and the willows that he brought, Salix aquatica gigantea, the big wet willow, the fastest growing tree in the world virtually, became, he got a lot of publicity through these, and we supported willow biomass, not realizing that 30 years later, it would cause the downfall of the Stormont Parliament and the cessation of all governance in Northern Ireland for 3 years. That was an unintended consequence, but the principles are still good. Our swimming pool is still, in Magherafelt, is still powered by willows growing on boggy land. I designed with a company called Farm Gas the first commercial anaerobic digester and in-vessel composting system in 1984-1985 for Bethlehem Abbey. Anaerobic digestion, the conversion of organic wastes into North Sea gas, your pipeline gas, into electricity and organic fertilizer really took off from this in Europe from this particular project. And Northern Ireland now has more anaerobic digester output per head of population than England, Scotland, or Wales. In fact, more than 40% of Northern Ireland's electricity is from renewable sources. And in 2 years, that will be in excess of 50%. And the goal is to make 110% of our consumption to be from renewable energy in Northern Ireland. In other words, instead of getting an electricity bill, each person should, in theory, if we organize society correctly, get an electricity check, a little bonus for having to look at wind turbines, having to see road traffic and so on. Well, of course, 14 or 15% of all of the global emissions come from dwelling houses. And my wife and I designed the first passive solar house in Ireland in 1995. It consumes 10% of the average fuel bill and therefore delivers 10% of the carbon dioxide. But when you add in the trees and the ground and the other carbon capture, we are pretty close to absolute zero emissions from this dwelling. The air temperature might be 10 degrees outside, but by the time it gets through the heating system, which is a heat harvesting system, it's 12 degrees hotter. It's 22 degrees on the inside of the house. So it works without any assistance from about 8 degrees outside temperature upwards. And the carbon dioxide created by the people inside the house goes through the ducting system into this greenhouse, and then it's absorbed by the tomato plants, and we grow food in the enhanced high CO2 environment. Initially, we expected the payback to be 11 years, but actually the value of the house increased by the cost of the total cost of the energy conservation measures in just 3 months. This is something that everybody can do. You can insulate your house. We have 0.5 meter of insulation in the ceiling, 0.5 meter in the floor. We have 100, the air gap in the walls increased from 100 millimeters to 300 millimeters. Not all of these things can be done on an old building, but everybody can super insulate their houses and add air-to-air heat exchangers, and you will save a fortune. Did living with 0 CO2 in this house make us richer or poorer? We decoupled. It made us wealthier. I used to say to people, our fuel bill is the camper van sitting on the driveway. That was an improvement in our condition by taking steps to reduce our energy bill. And Northern Ireland, I'm afraid to say, is one of the highest areas of energy poverty in the UK. Well, our support for integrated education, 10 years later, we held the same basic program, and the time was right. People saw the need, the idea had had time to gestate, the local school system was changing. We called the second meeting and signed up 120 children on that night. The school was built in less than a year. We raised £400,000 and it now has over 250 pupils, and it's spawned from the first batch of pupils an integrated secondary school which takes people up to university level. And we need to engage with all people on the planet. Mongolia may be crucial to the long-term renewable gas production for heating in Europe. It's an interesting story. But these were wonderful Mongolian people that Mahin and I met in Haifa, in Israel, at the Baha'i World Center, which is a beacon of light, transforming this barren rock into a paradise, calling the world to unity and harmony with nature. And I'm going to leave you with a couple of ideas that human prosperity means more than GDP, gross domestic product. Perhaps GDH could be used as a measure of success and prosperity. GDH is gross domestic happiness, which is the yardstick used by the country Bhutan. You should look up GDH. You can apply it to any company or any organization for that matter. Gross domestic happiness. More importantly, we need to recognize, as Ian was saying, that the earth is one country and mankind its citizens, and use science and technology to build beautiful things like this house of worship from recycled glass in an earthquake zone. When people are praying, you can tell it bathes the whole area in this lovely warm light through the walls of the building. So these two questions then. Do you think the world needs to change its behavior immediately to save biodiversity and global warming? Raise your hands if you think the world needs to change its behavior immediately to save biodiversity and global warming. My second question, do you think you need to change your behavior immediately to save biodiversity and global warming? And if so, how? Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Les. That was, I'm sure Ian and your talk have got everybody's neurons in their grey matter jingling and jangling. I'm dying to ask questions and produce comments. So in time-honored fashion, if you'd raise your hands, if you'd like to, obviously some people have turned the videos off and I can't see your hand raised, but some are doing it electronically like I see. So while you're thinking about it, then I'll take that first question. Joy, don't forget to unmute yourselves, please. And will you either address it to one or both speaker? It's up to you.
I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, sorry. I saw it was my cursor lying over your panel, Joy. Okay.
But I will make one comment while I've got the floor.
Go for it.
This is just, what's the word? I won't say. I was out all day today with the local conservation volunteers on Haslam Park, which I'm very fortunate to have just a stone's throw from my front door. We were planting little hawthorn saplings along a canal path and creating a, let me get it right, a dead hedge in front of the saplings so that the dogs and the walkers wouldn't accidentally step on the saplings and knock them over, which had clearly happened to the ones that had been planted previously. Now, you know, I mean, I've not done this before. I joined the group 2 months ago. It's the second time I've been with them. It was a wonderful experience, but it seems like a drop in the bucket. You know, it's nice when you look at it. I might even take a photograph, but you know, it's something. But compared to the globe and all the problems, it's giving me satisfaction, but I don't know what else.
Well, I'll turn that into a question and ask Les. Do you think that is a drop in the bucket, Les?
No, I don't. I think everything we do helps. Absolutely everything. You know, the world is eroded one journey at a time. It's one car journey at a time. It's 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide at a time. It's the decision to go on a bicycle rather than a car. It's the when you plant that hedge, Joy, you've no idea how many people, while you're not looking, are going to enjoy the 120 species that live on a hawthorn hedge. Hawthorn is one of the most two most species-rich plants in the flora of the United Kingdom are hawthorn and Quercus robur and Quercus petrea, the sessile and penduculate oak. Those trees have phenomenal capacity to hold and support local insects in all kinds of ways, which I would love to talk to you about. But I think what you've done is fantastic. Apart from the, you know, just think of the berries and the bird life and the sweet scent of the hawthorn blossom in the spring that will come out. And if the hawthorn or blackthorn gets old and robust and a bit ropey, you'll turn it into a walking stick for somebody, and they'll walk with your planting.
I've got Sylvia next. Don't forget to unmute yourself, Sylvia, and then Patricia Irvin in Ulster.
I was going to defer to Patricia, but mine's just a quick observation to say that everything that we do, what Joy is saying, is increasing the insect life, you know, helping to create you know, the bees so they can make honey so that we can eat the honey and become more healthy. You know, it's a cycle that continues. That's just an observation.
Thank you. Patricia?
Yeah, it does.
Yes, I'd like to address this to Ian. Because I'm involved and have been for many, many years with the United Nations Association here in Northern Ireland. I was attending a few weeks ago many of the UN 75th anniversary celebrations coming from New York and various other places, and it was actually very, very hopeful despite all the problems that we are very aware of. But one of the major things that came out of it was the need for civil society to be part of this whole UN family. And I would like to ask Ian if he thinks that maybe this is one of the major changes that we're going to see that's going to help look at those sustainable development goals, climate change, all the different issues. But, you know, civil society, who is civil society? Well, I'm assuming it's the man in the street, you, me, and everybody here. So we'd just like Ian's thoughts on this new word, civil society, which I think probably was another word for people power. I'm not sure.
Patricia, that's great. I mean, it's good that you've been involved in the the anniversary, the 75th anniversary, there was an occasion where it's an opportunity that has presented itself for people to think more fundamentally about the role of the United Nations,
Yeah.
and what it's doing, how it's doing it, and the relationships that bind these member states, these 196 member states. I mean, given that there were, I don't know how many, maybe 30 or 40 member states that formed the United Nations originally back in 1945, you know, it's multiplied in its, and it embraces the whole of humanity today. In terms of civil society, it's interesting. There are many different ways of reflecting on that comment. One, I think, is a particularly interesting one. And you've alluded to it, and Malcolm alluded to it in his address at the beginning, that the UN is struggling presently, and the Secretary General of the United Nations has made no bones about it either. And it was very interesting to see some of his communications on one of the critical issues that holds the United Nations system together at the beginning of this year, even before the pandemic. And he was talking quite extensively about trust. And trust had been eroded to a considerable degree, especially among some of the major powers that make up the UN system. And given that the 75th anniversary was upcoming, he reflected quite deeply on this. And he ventured, and this is really interesting, he ventured to civil society, not to the member states themselves, the nation states, to generate new options and visions for the reform of the United Nations system to make it more befitting. And one of the organizations that arose to the challenge in this regard was the Baha'i International Community, who presented some quite far-sighted changes that could be brought to the UN system, because without getting into the bureaucracy or the administration of it, it's largely unchanged in its structure since the days when it was formed. And so it doesn't reflect or represent the whole of humanity in terms of the people sitting on the executive, as you know, the sort of history behind that. And the General Assembly is often left, and the General Assembly makes up the whole, you know, the representative, if you like, the parliament of the world, doesn't feel as empowered as it should be. And so in turning to civil society and the Baha'i international community, along with all of the faith groups at the international level, are part and parcel of civil society, part and parcel of not what we will more generally call, if you like, non-government organizations or community-based organizations. And a little bit like I was saying in the presentation, in terms of implementation, without civil society, and in fact, without the private sector, without households and communities doing their part, then we won't make any progress. And it comes back a little bit to the point I think Joy was making there. Everything counts, everything that communities do. And I'm more convinced now than ever, from all the various different projects and countries that I've worked in across the world, that rather than expecting our leaders to necessarily define the right policy choices for us, even though that's what we aspire for, the real action will happen in our communities by community groups, which is what we might say civil society, arising to do their bit, a little bit like what we saw in COVID. When we had that first expression of lockdown and people feeling lonely in their communities, it was, if you like, community or neighborhood action that looked out for those people that were more isolated or more vulnerable. And that's what you can depend on when, if you like, the service providers and the institutions and the governments are unable to cope because they don't know what the response should be. It comes back to humanity. So I place a lot of faith in civil society. They play an enormous role. I've just done an evaluation of the United Nations work in Asia Pacific, 44 countries. And what's always inspiring is, although the UN plays a very important role, I wouldn't want to undermine it, especially given that we're being recorded here. It plays a very important role in intergovernmental policies to support the development of the human race. At the end of the day, it's really those people who are on the front line of service delivery, which is civil society by and large. And you consider in your own town the role that community organizations and civil society play. They're often on the front line meeting the needs of those people who are farthest away from services that need them most. And that's fully in alignment with the 2030 agenda in terms of reaching the farthest first and leaving no one behind. So that if it wasn't for civil society, we would be much further away from being able to achieve that goal. So they're absolutely fundamental to the whole thing. So embrace your civil society partners and encourage them. They are doing incredible work in all corners of the world, and no doubt in all of our communities as well. So that would be my rather long-winded answer to that. Thanks for the question. That's a brilliant one.
Thanks, Ian. Any other hands raised? Zoe, if you'd unmute yourself.
I'm thrilled to hear that. There have been many things in the last few weeks which I've found encouraging. The Universal House of Justice, in one of its letters, wrote the most positive, uplifting, inspiring two-word sentence that I have ever read. Have hope. And I just think that the things that I've been witnessing, particularly online, and I think Zoom itself is magical and bringing people together and inspiring us to do things for each other. But for my own small town of Peebles in the Scottish borders, I'm thrilled to say that my road, one of my neighbours, started a WhatsApp group, support group for this road, which everybody signed up to. And it's been really wonderful to see how it's linked everyone together. And although I've lived here 14 years, it's the first time I've actually managed to visit and speak to every person in that road. Now there's 25 households, there's something like 80 people. And I just think it's marvelous to have that link, but the community around about has been doing quite a lot of those supportive things that both Ian and Les have been talking about. And we've had a Scottish Government initiative in the town for a couple of years, which was on the high street, where we could actually go and ask for help about how we could address our fuel situation, our insulation, all sorts of things. And you could actually ask someone to come to your home and do an evaluation and give you guidance as to what you could do. And there would be assistance to help you to do some of those things. But it is actually the local community and the different groups. I think within I don't know, days of the first lockdown, 2,000 people signed up to help a COVID support group, and all ages, different people. And I had a little message through the door from a neighbor and from someone down the road who had joined this particular group. And it was a direct link, how to reach out if you needed help and what you could do if you wanted to offer help. And I thought that's a wonderful thing. We all witnessed what a difference the lockdown made to our atmosphere. It was palpable. I was able to talk to everyone I met when I went out for a walk, even the dog walkers. We would greet one another. If I was socially distanced outside a shop, I could talk to the people waiting and say, how do you feel about this? Are you not enjoying the social interactions? Do you not feel that this could be even better? That the new normal people are talking about should be better than the old normal? Let's work on it. We can improve it. Surely now we see that we are one human family living on one planet under one creator. Why can't we talk to each other and create a peaceful world where we all have the opportunities that we need to promote a positive, caring society? Anyway, enough from me. I'm inspired by Ian and Les, and I've got questions for each of them in a different context.
Okay, thanks, Zoe. That's a lovely contribution. Anybody else? A hand raise? You touched on mental health there. I know that in Preston, we had a series of presentations or talks on deep environmentalism, and I'm so glad to see Anna and John here. I don't know if either of you would like to say anything about deep environmentalism and how it relates to the issues you've been listening to. Would you perhaps, John?
Yeah, deep adaptation. It's something we've started to engage with, which is the idea that maybe, well, it takes as a starting point the fact that climate change is going to bring about enormous societal change, and that some of the consequences, some of the negative consequences, are going to be entirely inescapable. And so it's about how we prepare now for what will be a completely changed society, one that has to cope with the disappearance of existing food supply chains, and possibly even the disappearance of national governments and existing infrastructures. So it's taking the more extreme and the more extreme pessimistic view of what might happen, but preparing for it. And it's one that we're, well, I'll speak for both of us, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea, I don't know that we're 100% persuaded that this is going to happen, but I think it's worth being ready for the fact that that might happen, and that we need to be thinking about what form the new society will take.
Sort of hope for the best and plan for the worst.
I think that's it. Yeah, hope for the best and plan for the worst. But in that planning for the worst, it's looking for what are the positives that can come out of that. How do we acquire new skills? How do we return to some of the old skills from the past and start to make use of them? And what are we going to let go of that we don't need now? And what are the things that we're going to treasure and hang on to?
And so this is like a really small example of something I'm trialing right now. So I love craft. I've been making some Christmas cards, somewhat recycled, some of them, but rather than selling them, I'm offering them to people for a trade. So if you've got, and the idea being to start a conversation around exploring the circulation of wealth, be that items, or whatever, surplus produce from your garden, but circulating that locally, other than money, perhaps. So there's all sorts of interesting ways we're starting to explore it. Anyway, that's enough.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting contribution you've made. Would Les or Ian like to come back on this deep adaptation at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy to. I mean, I think it's entirely appropriate. It's Anna. Sorry, what's your partner's name? I've forgotten.
John.
John is not on the screen. John, I think is entirely appropriate because, how can I say this? Looking at the progress of the environmental sustainable development goals in Asia and the Pacific, given that it makes up a large part of the land and a significant part of the carbon dioxide and emissions that were shown in that graph that Les shared at the beginning of his presentation. The current predictions are that Asia Pacific will not reach its environmental sustainable development goals, and at the moment is going backwards on the environmental ones. This is even before the pandemic, which is also having consequences for food security. So yes, there will be, I'm sure you're right, without being a scientist, knock-on effects on food supply, the biodiversity, and seeing other commentators making rather startling remarks on these sorts of things as well. So yeah, it's good to have worst case scenario positions in mind and do something about them now. And I do like the whole thing about the circular ecosystem, sort of a circular economy approach as well that you're piloting as well, Anna. I think those sorts of things are really important. And yeah, let's continue to do that and learn lessons from them so that we can all benefit.
Thanks. And Les?
Yeah, no, I really warm to that idea. We've discovered in the last year the power of homemade bread and jam. Jars of jam and homemade bread are absolutely the new currency in the street here in our little lane. And there's something that I'm very conscious of, and that is there's 10 times more carbon in soil than there is in the trees growing in the soil. In other words, if you want to improve carbon absorption from the atmosphere, the way you do it is terre noire. You put as much organic matter in the soil as you can, make raised beds so that it drains, and then you can grow absolutely anything in it within the temperature, day degrees limits required by each individual species of plant. So that fits in nicely with the cottage garden, or the allotment, digging for victory, as it used to be called in the war. But basically, not letting the leaves wash down into the drains, but collecting them and putting them in your compost heap. And then a year later, putting that on your soil and then growing organic vegetables and fruit, and using a natural rotation. I can never remember the rhyme now. What is it? Beans, greens, roots, and fruits, something like that. You can look it up. But I mean, there's a natural rotation which will sustain soil fertility in a way that modern agriculture doesn't allow. And so I think we have got to recover, and we have got to decouple from our excessive use of herbicides, our excessive use of insecticides. I haven't seen a honeybee for 2 years. Now this year, we were so worried about it. We got no significant tomato crop last year, and a poor one the year before. So this year, I was in conversation with the beekeeper, and he brought some bees. Now, if you've never seen them up close, it's really interesting. A little box of bees that weighs a pound, what is it, like half a bag of sugar by weight. It's a little plastic box just about this big. And he said, there, you take that one, I'll take this one. And you hold it, and it's warm. It's like holding a pet dog. It radiates heat into your hands, and you can hear you can feel the life of this colony. And we put these bees into a particular place in the garden, and well, there were some technical issues with making new queens and regenerating from new genetic areas of the countryside and so forth. And it was a bit technically complicated for me. I'm not a beekeeper, but what I did notice was that we had a fantastic crop of tomatoes and cucumbers and everything, because it really does work. Our plants, our food plants are pollinated by bees. And we've just about eliminated bees in large areas of the United Kingdom now. We need to recover that. So this is where local groups can help. We can work with beekeepers. We can put people into conversations with farmers and say, would you mind not killing all the bees at this time of the year, etc. Work with the beekeepers and support this population of amazing animals. And yeah, okay. We can do a lot.
Thanks, Les. Well, I'm aware we're moving towards the close, so please, you know, if you've got a question and you were wondering whether to ask it, now's the time. Yes, Penny?
I suppose my question, and I'm not really sure how to even articulate it. You don't know what you don't know. That's life. You know, on many things, you know, we're ignorant. So we come to something on environment, or we come to something on plastic, or we watch something on television. And, you know, if it touches you, if it impacts upon you, you do something different. It might only be something tiny, you know, like obviously, I mean, you know, I came away from the talk with Les and I said to Les sort of, actually, you know, I'm one of those who sort of like walked away ashamed, because there are things that I could do, but for convenience, I don't do, you know. And there are lots of things I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm you know, not an expert on everything, and you know, I have my own field, and that's what I work in. So, but I've been aware. We've had this lockdown. We've had COVID. We've all seen sort of how wonderful the sort of, you know, the air has been. No planes going up, etc. We've also seen sort of, you know, so many programs on sort of plastic. I mean, you know, we've seen islands that sort of, you know, there's nobody even on them, but they're surrounded in plastic. You know what I mean? Nobody's living there. Nobody's creating it. It's just the seas washing it onto its beaches. And, you know, and you look at your recycling, and, you know, people are, but how? You know, I mean, I went for a walk the other day, and I have seen so many masks. We're all asked to wear masks now. And the number of masks that are just being chucked on the floor, in the bush, in the hedge, anywhere, you know. And I think to myself, how have we not managed to create a sense of, and maybe the word shame is wrong, but a sense of shame that, you know, you've seen something beautiful, you know, it's like when you clean up a garden or you see something and it's beautiful. Why do you want to dump your rubbish on it? You know, why make it, you know, this is a beautiful planet. Why can we not learn? You know, and in a way, we've got an opportunity here with all these flipping masks around the world, you know, they're just going to cause another massive, great big problem. And it just seems ludicrous to me, you know.
Okay, can I turn that into a question for Les? You showed us the school, Les, and the brilliant work there. How are we going to train the children to have a sense of, like when we were growing up, you take your litter home with you? What's going wrong with the education system?
Well, I see it as two problems. We've got the formal education system, and then we've got the internet and the informal education system. And we have a particular problem at the moment, and that is when I was younger, I could look at a newspaper and look at the heading on it, and I would see a Daily Mail or a Daily Express the Sun newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian, the Times, and so on. And I could pretty much know the background and the stance of the editorial in that newspaper. So there would be a left-wing newspaper, a right-wing newspaper, and so on. And I could choose to compare and contrast two ideas. I could go to a socialist newspaper and look at the same report from a capitalist newspaper, and then I could look at it from in the Times educational supplement and see what the teachers were thinking, and so on. The problem now is that the media that is the main communication system for people actually reinforces your own prejudices and your own viewpoint.
You mean the,
so if you start
the artificial intelligence,
the AI that is going to provide you with, the AI which is going to provide you with all your information, you think you're reading the same news feed that I do, Malcolm? No. You know, you might be interested in medicine. I might be interested in beekeeping. You know, all my stuff is going to be biased towards beekeeping, and everything that you see will be biased towards medicine, because the AI recognizes what you click on and what you're interested in, and therefore.
So do you think it's about teaching the children to be more critical in their thinking, to be more less dependent on social media?
Yeah, and you know, I read an article a few weeks ago, and it said we should watch what we should watch the behavior of the owners of the companies like Facebook and Twitter and so on. They don't allow their children to use the internet because it destroys critical thinking. It simply reinforces the path that you set yourself upon. So we have a real problem. Once somebody has decided, for instance, that climate change is not real, every single feed that they get from then on will reinforce that. Yeah. And there's no way that they can break out of that on the media unless they make a concerted effort. And that doesn't happen because you simply get fed down this wormhole of prejudices which you've set up by yourself and with the advertising and so on. So education at the moment is in a bind. It's a real problem. And I think we've got to have a lot of conversations about how we use social media, Zoomology, and all of these other technologies which are moving in very quickly.
Thanks.
And if you think it's, I'd just like to say one final thing. If we think it's bad now, when Elon Musk provides his satellites, there will not be a human being on the planet who cannot get 160 gigabytes per second with a 0.2, a 20 millisecond delay. In other words, something about 100 times faster than we have now to every single human being on the planet, no matter where they are. And that's going to provide a really interesting dynamic between the countryside and the city. And it will also speed up this basic issue that we've got on how do we educate people? What is truth? What is real? These are these are important things, and I think the local neighborhood will be the place where this is solved. So when you dig the ground, you understand what soil is, and that everything that we have depends on that soil. Every atom in our bodies depends on the water and the salts in that soil, because that makes a lettuce, and you eat the lettuce and you become a reformed lettuce effectively. You know, that's what we are, 26% lettuce. We could go on. I can see hand.
Thanks, Les. I'm going to just give the last question to someone who's maybe not spoken before. Is there anyone who would like to ask?
Can I just ask if Ian can come back on what I said, please?
Sorry.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Penny. I mean, I think it's a very interesting observation. On the issue of, I mean, I think there's three responses. I'll give them very briefly. I think one is that we seem to have lost touch, not just children, but all of us have lost touch with the magical, the wonderment of nature and the sacred, and the beauty of it somehow, because we're living and we're being sort of influenced to become much more material. And for some of us that's working, but for others it's sort of driving us towards this quest for things which are, as I say, this experience of this mystical, this magical thing. And I think if we had more respect for the sacred nature of nature, we wouldn't be disposing of those masks in that way. I think that's one thing. I would be encouraged and uplifted somewhat by the fact that through education, through successive generations, we can change those types of behaviors and perceptions. We're more aware in the generation that we're living in than we were in the past of things, and as a result, we've achieved great change. I think some of that relates to some of the sort of slides I was showing in terms of poverty, for example, and other health-related challenges and environmental challenges. So I think we have it within us to change. I think the other element is, if we just take that plastic bags, you talked about marine debris or sea debris, which is a huge issue, but we are able to change our policies, the demand and supply side, and we're being educated in our awareness as to the damage of plastics in the system. And so we're depending much less on plastic bags. And we just use the economy for that as well as education. We price plastic, and we make consumer choices as well. We're educated whether we want to buy our apples in a plastic bag or not. If we want to have something wrapped in a particular way, we can make those and we can challenge the policies of the day, either through our purchasing power or through the other political processes that we could be engaged in. So there are lots of ways, I think, to bring about change. I'd be quite optimistic that we can tackle some of these things.
Thank you.
It's a great observation, yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think we've gone over our time now, so I want to finish by thanking our two guest speakers, Les and Ian, very much in the time-honoured way. If you could all put your hands together and show your appreciation. Thank you very much. And
thank you to everybody. I really appreciate the discussion. It's been fabulous.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody.